Sergio Guzmán. Sergio is the director of Colombia Risk Analysis, and he's here to talk to us about how the recent protests that have rocked Colombia are now impacting its nearshore industry. So, Sergio, could you tell us firstly how business as usual has been affected over the last few weeks?
Well, thank you very much, Peter, and to all the viewers out there. It's a pleasure to be here. The protest, which started on April 29th, have had an impact on the entire country's economy. It's been almost 26 days of protest. On the 28th, it will be a month of protest. Certain cities have been blockaded substantially, such as Cali. Other cities have had temporary restrictions on mobility, such as Bogotá, such as Medellín, Cartagena, Bucaramanga, Neiva, Popayán, and Pasto. The ability of people to get to and from work has been curbed somewhat during the daytime, but those working from home, or at least having home offices, have been unaffected. So many BPOs and many call centers or technology providers who have kept the majority of work from home policies are likely to have been unaffected substantially by this strike. But if the strike extends for a long time, many workers are going to see fuel shortages, food shortages affect their daily routines and their daily lives. This has been already an occurrence that's been more commonplace in cities like Cali, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's an unsurmountable obstacle for doing business in Colombia.
Okay. And what do you think are the ongoing consequences for investment traction to the country, considering the protests and, of course, the economy is still recovering from the impact of the pandemic?
It's been three weeks since investors have been calling us and asking us what this means for the long-term future of Colombia. And it's still very early to say, that this is going to negatively impact Colombia's status as an attractive investment destination. The fundamentals for the economy remain. We have educated personnel, we have very good facilities and very good connectivity. Our competitiveness, tax-wise and others, are improving in the country. We have an interest in making hiring much more lean and much more easy for the private sector.
And in terms of the infrastructure that BPO and call centres use in the country, has there been any impact on the infrastructure, for example, power outages or internet outages? Can you expand a little upon that?
No, at the moment, internet connectivity has continued unabated. We've had continuous power. Colombia doesn't depend on foreign sources of power, and power infrastructure has not been affected due to the protests. What has been affected is sort of, like I was mentioning, fuel shortages, fuel delivery to different parts of the country that has hindered mobility for many people. But connectivity in terms of the power grid has remained on. Connectivity in terms of internet has remained on, although there's been circumstances and allegations wondering whether or not the government has shut down the internet in several places in response to uploaded videos from protesters. However, those allegations are not yet confirmed. It's unlikely, however, that any event of this nature could potentially affect the private sector.
Of course. And Sergio, you mentioned the impact on mobility throughout the country. Can I ask, has there been reports of widespread inability to get to the office? Of course, lots of people are still working from home, as you've mentioned, but how about those people who are still heading into the office every day?
It's difficult, and it really depends on what city and what circumstances there is. My estimate, my analysis is that this is likely to peter out because many of the blockades are reducing the legitimacy of the protest. And the longer the blockades continue, the less legitimate the protest movement is going to become, and the weaker it will be vis-a-vis the government. Now, partly the government's ability to reach a negotiated solution with the protest is going to determine its longevity. But in terms of the blockades, it is already recognized that they've run their course politically. So it's very likely that in the coming weeks, these blockades will begin to weaken, mobility will begin to restore, and that's going to be even more noticeable if the government and the protest movement begin conversations, begin negotiations, and begin dialogue where protesters are expected to loosen restrictions.
Okay. And so you expect the protests to cool down in a matter of weeks at least. But what do you think of the kind of ongoing consequences for the country?
Yeah, absolutely, Peter. I think one of the major points of contention, or at least one of the things that make this protest difficult to resolve, is that there's very little willingness to debate and to negotiate and to dialogue on issues that matter to us Colombians the most. Not just on taxes, but also on things like inequality, like corruption, like the implementation of the peace agreement, where this government and many members of the opposition have yet to reach common ground, have yet to reach consensus. And unfortunately, with elections coming up in 2022, almost a year to the day now, we're seeing that many of those decisions are going to be held out until the presidential election is consumed. And so we're expecting one more year of unrest, of strikes, of difficulty, unless the government is able to reach a consensus, reach an agreement, and establish a working framework with the opposition, not just to address problems in the next year, but to address problems in the next 15 years with Colombia. And that doesn't necessarily mean a new constitution or a new social contract, but a way in which the government is able to respond to citizen demands in a way that is peaceful, in a way that is nonviolent, and in a way that contributes to a constructive society.
And lastly, Sergio, how would you like to see things playing out? How would you like to see both parties come to the table and make an agreement for the improved future of Colombia?
I think international mediation is going to be key for the parties to reach an agreement, because at this point it doesn't seem that there's much trust, that there's much of an ability to make tough choices, to make decisions. And so international mediation, prompted in part by the business sector that urgently needs to get back to work, and prompted in part by diplomatic good offices of allies, will be a way forward for us Colombians to resolve this situation that politically we seem to be at an impasse.